Salutations, respected viewers. It's George from Ireland once again going live. So I'm going to riff on one of my favorite themes, just how abominable Donald Trump is. So this is about his willful ignorance. So what is willful ignorance? And perhaps I'm being generous in accusing him of that. Is that you just choose to know very little and just disregard the truth. So ignorance is derived from ignore. So originally it's about ignoring things that at some level you knew, but decided to pretend weren't true. But obviously the word has evolved in its signification, and these days indicates an absence of knowledge, which is not to say he knows absolutely nothing. But Donald Trump is a man who's notable for his belligerent stupidity, and he's just egregiously incurious. It's said to never read a book. The only way you can get him to peruse anything is by putting his name in it all the time, and he's utterly self-obsessed. An egomaniac, which is why he had so many Trump Towers and Trump Steaks and the Trump Organization and Trump University, and putting his name everywhere. His narcissism has been discussed till people are blue in the face, as in narcissism, self-love. Narcissus, this figure in ancient Greek mythology, was so fixated with his own likeness, he would look into the water to see his image, because there had no mirrors back then, supposedly, and he fell in and drowned. So it's a cautionary tale, a salutary warning against self-adoration. Anyway, I can't remember who said it was. Who said you're entitled to your opinion, but not to your own facts. So, on the same factual basis, two people could form different opinions, and these could both be respectable opinions. I know it's debatable what quite is respectable, but Trump's, I don't think, are. Largely depends which opinion you're talking about. But of course, he changes his mind all the time. His mind is a weather vane. He'll say what he perceives to be to his advantage in that particular moment. The staggering thing is how many people trust him. Why on earth would you trust somebody so dishonest? You can, on the Washington Post, you can read lists of thousands upon thousands of lies he's told, as well as the lies he's told on the record since becoming president. They're also misleading statements, so things which are not outright lies, but are still dishonest. And then there are plenty, which I said earlier, are barefaced lies, brazen lies, 100% opposite of the truth. So comment is free, but facts are sacred. So said Charles Prestwich Scott, who founded The Guardian. So we've got to find out what the truth is, and on that basis, form our policies. Because if we're doing it on a false basis, then our policies will be flawed, might even be dead wrong. So that's what an intelligent person would do, be on a quest for truth. And it's sometimes uncomfortable. It may not be an easy time, may not find out things that are to be true that you didn't wish to be, or likewise things you hoped were true actually turn out to be bogus. So Trump is notable for his obstinate idiocy, not informing himself, persisting in bogus beliefs. I suppose I should furnish you some examples. Hi, Claudio Sewell. Good morning. It's not morning where I am. There's the notorious Central Park jogger case where 5 black and Latino youths were accused of raping and severely beating up a white woman, blah, blah, blah. And then Trump takes out those adverts saying these guys are guilty. They ought to get the death penalty, even though they're minors. They had too many rights. Okay, they have incredible rights, and victims should have rights. So there he was attacking the presumption of innocence. But when he is under investigation, when some of his cronies are under investigation, obviously completely the other way, he thought that these entirely legal and ethical investigations and searches were outrageous. The whole thing was bogus. Of course, it wasn't false. It's been proven. There have been several convictions, and on and on. The Mueller investigation. So maybe it's because they were penniless ethnic minority boys that he thought he should do this. And even after these unfortunate children were completely exonerated, he continued to insist they were guilty. So that's an example of him making a statement in the face of the truth, which is proven to be bogus, what he was saying. Likewise about Obama's birth certificate, or the whole birther controversy. He should have lost credibility a very long time ago. A man who's lost billions upon billions of dollars, who's an absolute walking disaster zone in terms of business, who's just such a flagrant liar, claiming to have donated $1 million to veterans in 2016 when he hadn't, and things like that. Absolutely tight-fisted. Now, some tycoons are known for their liberality, and they donate very handsomely to noble causes. Trump, I'm not aware that he ever gave a penny to charity. People say that his charity was supposedly just a slush fund for his family. The charity was themselves. And his donations to politicians, they were all very much self-interested. He was doing it because he expected a payback. I know he's not the only one who did that, but there was no genuine philanthropy on his part, or even ideological commitment. So Trump always emotionalizes things. If you disagree with him, you're a loser, you're part of the failed Washington establishment and things like that. So to curry favor with him, you've got to caress his ego, you've got to whisper sweet nothings into his ear, or probably more like broadcast them, saying that he's magnificent and he's so multi-talented. So this is how he's such a toddler, that it's all about him and his emotional state, what you're saying to suck up to him. Have you rolled out the red carpet sufficiently for him? Have you abased yourself enough for him? So, and there are some world leaders who are willing to do obeisance to him, and he likes that. Kim Jong-un would be an example. So anybody with any background, any backbone or decorum who will not kowtow to Trump, well, that will pique Trump's ire. So he has these preconceived nostra in his head that whites are good, that Hispanic people are bad, things like that. So that's why he's always fulminating against ethnic minority people, that he thinks he's somehow gifted. He's boasted that he's a genius, and yet he's so ashamed of his high school record, he won't have that released. So he's got a head in the sand attitude to anything he doesn't like. You see how, you describe him right, that's the way he is. Thank you, Claudio Sewell. By the way, people, if you don't want me saying your name on air, just let me know. Some of his foreign policy is wrong-headed, so he's taking on Russia, North Korea, China, Venezuela at the same time with sanctions, and Iran. That's too many. If he targeted a few of those, it might have helped. But actually, by cutting off hydrocarbons from, say, Venezuela and Iran, that drives up the price, and Russia picks up the slack and they make more money. If you picked one or two of those and only had sanctions against them, they would crumble. You know, he's picked a fight with China, this trade war, which the United States is unlikely to win. He thinks that he continued to insist that Mexico would pay for this war when there's absolutely no evidence they would, and there was plenty of evidence to the contrary. I don't know if a single Mexican had ever said that they'd pay so much as 1 peso towards it, and many Mexican politicians pledged that they would never give a cent towards the wall. And the wall became a fence and isn't being built. 13 miles of it is under construction, that's it. Otherwise, they are repairing the existing border fence. So there's so much confirmation bias from him, and that is when I seek out information to bolster the opinions I already hold, and then I also seek information to try and disprove opinions that I dislike. Anything will tend to undermine the opposing side, anything that will buttress my side, things like that, to reinforce the opinions that one has already formed. And so therefore seeking sources of news and opinion, which one will find to one's taste. So he filters according to preference. I know a lot of people do that. I do this as well. Something, I don't want to read that book because I know that one will irritate me. But sometimes I get over myself and I find the courage to read through something that I find distasteful. So people are going to have contrary opinions, and I can listen to those, try not to get irked about it. Some issues are very emotive. Sup, George. Hi, Shad Walter. Sup is what, super? I'm hoping it's not supper. What strange, there's a white face with black glasses there. There are certain buzzwords which can really needle people. Some words really sting, and people can overreact if they feel that their nation is being insulted or something. So there are inconvenient truths. It's like Al Gore said, that film, An Inconvenient Truth, global warming. I'd much prefer to believe that it wasn't happening, that it wasn't anthropogenic, that it wasn't going to seriously harm us. How splendid would it be if we could burn hydrocarbons willy-nilly with ne'er a worry in the world? It wasn't going to damage the environment. That'd be great. But unfortunately, that is not the case. It is. And so tough decisions have to be made. There are going to have to be some sacrifices. We're going to have to, at the very least, put some money into green energy. and other things, or else just live less well. Smaller houses, not flying so much, not driving so much, smaller cars, more efficient. Hi, Shadwater, fine. Okay, so this is what objectivity is. Being dispassionate, not taking sides. You might have an opinion, manage to suppress that and examine things in a fair way, right? Not trying to find information which looks good for my side, exaggerating that, disregarding the information which reflects discredit on my side, and trying to indeed suggest that information is false. Even if it's true, it's only tangentially relevant, it's negligible, trying to underplay the significance of, say, wrongdoing on my side, trying to hype up the wrongdoing of the other side to inflate the figures and things like that. Always just seeking to cast aspersions on the other side, to cast doubt on their statements, things like that. So what else? So we're trying to lay aside prejudice in the objective search for the truth. And obviously subjectivity is the opposite. Well, it looks good for my side, so that must be true. It looks bad for the other side, therefore that must be true, things like that. And okay, so like politicians often do that. They have a slant towards their own side. Judges are not supposed to do that. Should be the opposite. Referees, people like that. I remember reading this book about intelligence. It was by Ben McIntyre, this British author, about all these sort of true cases of espionage. And one of the ways they were able to hoodwink the Axis in the Second World War is the Axis had this fatal flaw, want to believability. They were falling for disinformation just because it was attractive to believe. And because they found it alluring, they indeed credited it. So you mustn't believe something just because it suits you, all right? I know it's easier said than done. I don't always manage this myself. So a dispassionate and open-minded person would be seeking the truth, and that's what maturity is. So people should try to develop intellectual humility. I could be wrong. Now, Trump doesn't have that, to comprehend the arguments of the other side, which is not to sympathize with them or partially agree with them. You might partly agree with them, but you'll sometimes find me saying this in some of my videos. I can articulate the viewpoint of my opponents, and often I perceive that there is some logic to the case they're forwarding. But even though their rationale holds water up to a certain point, and I can sometimes apply that rationale myself in an opposite direction, it's just not enough. I'm not convinced by it. And there's often a spectrum of an opinion, and you don't have to go all the way along it to follow it to its intellectual vanishing point. If I said drugs should be legalized, I might say, but like cocaine, because that's too harmful, something like that. Or if I say, let's have gun control, I say, well, they ought to outlaw assault rifles, but I don't think they should outlaw handguns. You might say, but wait a second, by the rationale which says that guns should be restricted because they cause deaths, come on, you've got to go further. You've got to go the whole hog and outlaw handguns as well. You don't actually. There can be a balance. One's not obliged to go all the way, this way or that direction. So people often misuse the word understand, meaning half sympathize, but I don't. So I can put the other side's argument, and I often do this when I debate online. So see the issue from the other angle, and Trump never seems to do this. Somebody has to lose, which is foolish and childish. There are cases where it's like that, and there are others where it's not. Trade, supposedly, is best for both countries. We get to sell our products more than we did before. We get to purchase products that were more expensive before. We get to purchase them for a lower price, and blah, blah, blah. Now, there will be winners and losers in both countries. Okay, that's where protectionist comes in. No, we want to protect our industry because the other country will sell their products. Sometimes they're better, sometimes they're cheaper, or both, and that'll hurt domestic producers, and blah, blah, blah. So Trump is very volatile. So as I said, he is completely lacking in intellectual humility, but he can certainly change his mind, although mind might be an exaggeration in his case, which is why he's performed a volte-face on so many issues. I remember in the 80s saying he was a Republican, agreed with the views of the Republican Party. He didn't say what those were, didn't express any views on any particular issues. And then he was a Democrat, indeed a Hillary Clinton donor. If Hillary Clinton is detestable, well, so's he. He knew exactly what she was like. Her public profile was very well known for decades, and he donated to her at this time. You know that Pizzagate thing, this ludicrous conspiracy theory that Hillary Clinton was somehow involved in some child sex trafficking ring to do with pizza parlors. Well, and it's out there in the blogosphere. Donald Trump supporters are very eager to disseminate that one. If that's true, well, Donald Trump, he too bears some guilt because despite being cognizant of that, he was still stumping up the readies for Hillary Clinton at the time. Dare I ask, are you a journalist professor? No, I'm not a professor. I don't have a PhD or anything. Yeah, I'm a freelance journalist. So what did I get to about changing his views on things? Then became a Republican, under Obama. So guns, he's talked about guns several times since his presidency. After a large-scale shooting, he said, we'll do that. Live stream is becoming addictive. Indeed it is. You're hooked on it too. Thanks, Alan Gibbon. And I found I get rather more hits this way. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, suggest any topics you'd like me to talk about. Now, I know Meghan Markle, she always gets a lot of hits if she comes up. So I thought of doing one outside her residence, which is Kensington Palace, and I haven't talked about this gentleman for quite some time, is the Honourable Jacob Rees-Mogg. Well, I haven't done a whole video on him, but he's got a very fanatical following. So on Iraq, Trump was in favour in 2003, obviously lied about his position several years later, saying he was always dead against. Then he changed his mind again, said, well, we should just sort of grab the oil, blah, blah, blah. Again, we should pull out. And likewise, as president, he's flipped. Now, changing your mind can be an absolutely honourable thing to do. It's the right thing to do. Now, who was it? Was it John Stuart Mill said, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do? Or when I realise I'm wrong, I've changed my mind. And sometimes I'm wrong. Trump's never wrong. Have you ever heard him say he's wrong? Have you ever heard him say sorry? The nearest he came to is with Megyn Kelly when he came out with this vile misogynistic insult saying she's riding the Crimson Wave. There she was being a decent journalist, asking him a few worthwhile questions as a political candidate, and he said she was riding the Crimson Wave, there was blood coming out of her wherever, in a very crude allusion to menstruation. And then he had the barefaced cheek to deny it was any allusion to menstruation. Only an absolute moron would be stupid enough to believe of what he said there about it not being something relating to menstruation. So there's no walk back on when he does these things saying, okay, I changed my mind, I was wrong. Just pretend as though he hadn't held that other position previously. Afghanistan, Iraq was a surge of pull out immediately. Have you ever seen Trump laugh? No, I haven't actually. That's a very valid point. What does that mean about his character? A man with no sense of humour, who can't crack a joke, who can only come out with a particularly vile insult below the belt, always punching down, always trying to belittle and humiliate people who are not as wealthy as him, who's not as powerful as him, who are in ethnic groups that suffer discrimination. That's who we'll go for. So he is just the lowest of the low, an utterly despicable and detestable bully. I'm sorry to say it reflects very poorly on the United States that this man won. I know he only got 46% of the vote, and even then some Americans don't bother to vote, so his support is rather lower than that. But, I like to think that in Ireland or Great Britain, this man wouldn't have got 46% of the vote, we got more like 6% of the vote. So I remember him saying that Obama founded ISIS, just an absolutely foul slur, yet another shameless lie, calumniating a courageous and honourable man who would send troops to fight ISIS, and that Hillary Clinton founded ISIS. And then in that very same speech, that same rally, Trump saying, oh, well, no, they didn't really found ISIS. And a moment later, during that same speech, Trump said, well, actually, it's not really a lie, they did found ISIS. A man who always makes up numbers. When we talk about something important to do with the economy, good God, this gross conspiracy theory. Now, conspiracy theories aren't bogus as such. If there really is a conspiracy theory, then there really is a conspiracy, then the theory could be proved right. But unfortunately, a lot of loonies out there have come up with completely silly ones, just traducing various establishment figures. I know various establishment figures sometimes deserve to be lampooned and excoriated, but all these barking mad ones about how the moon landing wasn't real, or I don't know, was it the CIA bumped off John F. Kennedy or things like that. Okay, like when Trump was about to launch missiles on Iran, and at the last minute he changed his mind because the drone was shot down because it was going to kill dozens of people, because he said it was disproportionate because too many people would have been killed. Shouldn't you have asked that in the planning stage? this Mr. President even worse than he is Bolsonaro a thug. Unfortunately, I don't know a great deal about Bolsonaro, so I can't expand on that issue. You should have asked such questions in the planning stage. Do you see about him not having an inquiring mind? He ought to be reasonably inquisitive. I remember reading Colin Powell's memoirs and saying Bill Clinton asked the right questions. If there's a possible military operation coming up, the president as commander-in-chief has got to say, well, what's the likelihood of success and what sort of casualties expect on our side and the other side, and look at various scenarios. What if it goes wrong? Some of our men get captured, whatever. If it was meant to be secret, is it deniable? Things like that. So I call to mind what John Locke said, that I know that truth is the opposite of falsity and it's worth the seeking. So we should try and find out what is true, and when we know what is true, then we can try to make wise decisions. But it's very hard to make sensible decisions if you're making it on the basis of something which is bogus. Does Iran have a nuclear weapons program? If it does, that might lead to sanctions or even military action. If it does not, that's a complete game changer. You know, would air raids destroy an Iranian nuclear weapons program? Or would it significantly degrade it? If it would, and we obviously can't be certain how successful it will be, if it probably would, it might be worth doing. If it probably wouldn't, surely it's not worth doing. And on and on. That's why you've got to find out what the truth is. And sometimes there's not absolute truth. This is an educated guess. It's a reasonable estimate based on expert opinion. Only then can you move forward and formulate a sensible policy. Anyway, otherwise your policy is conceived in error and more likely to go badly wrong. So Trump seems to be against the Enlightenment, and so are many of his supporters. They're the people who sort of disbelieve in evolution. While Callahan's law is that the people who disbelieve in evolution prove themselves to be the missing link. It's a bit like another one of my laws is about white supremacists. White supremacists disprove the notion of white supremacy because they tend to be so loathsome and such ignorant knuckle draggers themselves. So, as I say, he's anti-intellectual. The various segments of society he talks up, like the clergy, business people, the military and so on, I can't think who else, the less educated blue-collar workers, not academics, I notice, and not teachers. That's quite telling. So another thing is Trump, he grossly overestimates his own aptitude in various areas, saying he knows more about construction than anybody else, that he knows more about ISIS than the generals. He's a fantastic deal maker. He's obviously a brilliant businessman. He made billions of dollars, and he could have risen to the top of the military. Now, I don't know any reason to believe any of this. What does he know about ISIS? How did he find out? Watching Fox News? Did he read any books? Did he speak to any experts? He regularly dismisses expert advice as being nonsensical if he just finds it unappealing. So apparently he has a severe personality disorder and some form of dementia. Should we take pity of the man? Now, obviously, I'm not a psychiatrist. I can't diagnose him. But as an ordinary member of the public, it's true. Because, yeah, I'm not a physician, but I can diagnose a common cold. You know, I'm not a doctor. I can tell when someone's got Down syndrome. You don't need to be a doctor to tell if somebody's bleeding. There are some medical conditions which are so blatant, any mental disorder the person is suffering from. But it strikes me that he certainly has a derangement of mind. He's very much delinquent. So he has no aptitude for learning of any kind, so far as I can see. Seems to be an utterly in 2000. No American bank would lend him a bean. I wouldn't either. You'd have to be utterly idiotic to do so. So he's no scholar. You don't need to be an intellectual to be president. Don't you think he should be dim? He should be above average. And you look how brave some of them are, having graduated from some of the top universities in the United States and abroad. You look at Bill Clinton, a Rhodes Scholar. You look at Obama, professor of constitutional law, how eloquent he was, without using overly florid or sesquical lucidity. And what a jarring contrast it is when this absolute orangutan Donald Trump comes along. And I remember it was Bill Maher said he would give $1 million to charity if Trump could prove that his mother was not an orangutan. And Trump actually tried to sue on that, as it was a contract. A man with no sense of humor, no sense of proportion, how thin-skinned he is, how brittle his ego is. I remember Fox News absolutely savaging Obama, claiming that he was too touchy. I don't know of any evidence that that's true. Whereas look how hypersensitive Trump is What a crybaby, what a snowflake. And yet his partisans are constantly slamming Trump's opponents as being snowflakes and crybabies. A few of them are, some of the far left people. Why don't his supporters recognise his obvious mental unfitness? Good question. Well, I suppose this comes back to subjectivity. Closed-minded, they've decided to believe in him, they put their faith in him. These people are deeply committed. It would be too embarrassing to come down. Actually, I was conned by him. What a chump I was to fall for Trump and tick his box on the ballot paper. And we're stuck with him now. And he hasn't brought back the manufacturing jobs, and he hasn't won the trade war, and he hasn't withdrawn from Iraq, and he hasn't withdrawn from Syria, and he hasn't withdrawn from Afghanistan, and he hasn't built the wall, and he hasn't funded Medicaid, and he hasn't funded Medicare, and Mexico hasn't paid any money towards the wall, and on and on and on. Now, I know some of these things about Medicare and Medicaid. It's obviously Congress, not him, controls the power of the purse. His team did set forth the budget, which they basically got through. So his proposal was completely about defunding it. So absolute shamelessness works for him. As bold as brass, he'll tell an outright lie and just do it. He'll tell an outright lie and just do it endlessly and get away with it. How does he do it? It's staggering. So, but there are people who are willfully ignorant, who'll just switch off their cognitive faculties, and that's the incredible thing, I suppose, with faith, is people who can be rational on other issues, but not on this particular one, like the personality of Donald Trump. And these people, I would suspect, would not be so illogical when it comes to business deals they're doing or buying things. You can see it's brass. A man told me it's gold. Well, I'm just going to believe it's brass, so I believe it's gold because I want to believe it's gold, and I get myself ripped off. I doubt you would do that, even if you're a Trump voter. So people have hardened their positions, and he has his entrenched supporters. So they say that American society has been bifurcated, which is a bit of an exaggeration. There's always been a degree of partisanship, but the polarization now is more extreme than perhaps ever before. So some people are invested in him, and then it would be an identity crisis for them to acknowledge that they were hoodwinked by someone, their prejudices, to give a very unconvincing impression of religiosity, even saying 2 Corinthians rather than 2 Corinthians, and on and on. A man who never talked about faith beforehand, I don't think has ever been seen at a church, apart from weddings. Nothing wrong with that. But what obviously is sickening is then to pretend to be religious, just for the sake of grubbing for votes. And then it worked. Well, these are people of faith, irrationalists. And so Trump is able to get away with things by just saying fake news and false accusing his critics of his own worst vices. And then Trump, then obviously Fox News joins him in that, and Fox News is more or less the PR agency of the Trump organization. Now, there are some decent journalists at Fox News still, people like Shep Smith or Chris Wallace, who do some real journalism, who ask politicians challenging questions, do real analysis, and tell the truth. But they're most of them who are really just hacks, who are simply propagandists for the Trump organization. Not just the White House, but really his company. Now, what is propaganda? It doesn't have to be a lie. It can sometimes be a lie, but it's selective in a particular direction, right? To present one side in the most favorable possible light, to reflect the maximum discredit on the other side. And so only choosing what you say, you're only telling the truth, choosing to tell this truth, but to deliberately disregard that other fact, and to use more emotive languages when that. Tucker Carlson is your favorite man at Fox. Well, I can't say I concur. You can see my videos on him elsewhere. So there's a certain cognitive cowardice in people refusing to acknowledge the truth when they find it that it's not to their liking. And I know this is a tendency in most people, including in present company, but I strive to overcome that. And I think Trump probably does the opposite, tries to go the other way. So truth hurts sometimes, and he won't acknowledge unpalatable truths about how his policies are failing, or that he got it wrong, or saying sorry, or that Obama's deserve some respect, things like that. So there we are, all things that are so bad about Donald J. Trump, a man I very much hope we'll see the back of in November 2020, although I wouldn't count on it. I think he'll lose, not by that much. He's doing quite badly in the polls, but he's more or less at the nadir of his presidency. Typically, presidents claw back support in the last year of their presidency, particularly when the public see who the opposition is, who the other potential president is. And things could go right for him. Looks like a recession's coming, but if not, that increases his chances. He might rain bombs on a country full of brown people, and that will play well with a certain segment of the electorate. Okay, switching off now.